You guys hear me okay? Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction. What an honor I have this morning to introduce four amazing leaders that they have something in common, and that's their understanding of tourism. I'm going to ask my distinguished panel to come up here. We will do this session in Spanish, so please make sure that you have your translation handy. And let me have Laura Chinchilla, former president of Costa Rica, great supporter of tourism, please. President Felipe Calderón, former president of Mexico, as well, great supporter of tourism. José María Aznar, former president of Spain. And Marcos Peña, the chief cabinet of Argentina. Please welcome. Donde tú quieras.
Acá está. Aquí está el nombre puesto.
Por favor. Qué gran honor, tenerlos aquí.
It's an honor
Esta
to
mañana.
have you all here this morning, and mainly given the importance of tourism, something that the four of you, I was thinking what you have in common, and the four of you have something in common. They understand the importance of tourism. Not only that, they fully support. We have three former presidents here of important tourism destinations. Spain last year was the second country in number of arrivals, but during Aznar's office, they made big investments in infrastructure. He involved the tourism sector a lot. President Calderón also transformed tourism in Mexico, breaking records, and of course his support and understanding. Laura Chinchilla, former president of Costa Rica, where tourism is a very important niche, and sustainability as well. And Marcos Peña, that is behind the strategy and execution and the transformation that President Macri is carrying out, that we're all delighted about. We are happy here in Argentina. And you have an extraordinary Minister of Tourism helping you. So welcome, the four of you. So I will be the one that will talk the least today because we want to hear from all of you. I would like to start first by sharing some of your vision. Last year, tourism globally grew by 4.6% of GDP when the global economy grew by 3%, 50% more. That reveals the potential of our sector. You're experts, so I would like to start with a short statement, just 2 or 3 minutes each, to give us your vision on tourism, how you see things, and then we will have some Q&A, if you agree. We can start with Laura, Costa Rica. So Laura, what is your vision on the future of tourism? Why is travel and tourism important? Well, undoubtedly, tourism has been essential in our development agenda as a country. It represents almost 7% of GDP, almost 30 or more than 30% of the foreign exchange generated, 27% of jobs. And something that is very important for us is the issue of sustainability, social sustainability and environmental sustainability and quality. Those are the three pillars on which we have built our value proposal. As a result, from that labor force focused on tourism, almost 80% comes from the lowest quintile of the population, and almost 60% of the jobs are for women, many heads of their household. So tourism for us is an important pivot of our project as a country. And to the future, we are very committed with that vision. Fortunately, we've managed to have a state policy. So from administration to administration, this is sustained, the big strategic lines of the project. And the idea is to continue being competitive, attracting tourism based on those three elements that I mentioned: social responsibility, sustainability, environmental sustainability, and quality. President Calderón, thank you. First, thank you to the WTTC for the invitation. And second, I think that the key of tourism is recognizing its essential contribution to people's lives and to societies and to governments. And second, as a result, it is a priority. 10% of global GDP is related to tourism. To the extent that the economies grow, they move from being agricultural economies, industrial, and finally economy, service industries. So, and this will be so particularly in tourism. It will be one of the winning activities in terms of job generation. And that is key for any government, for any society. We have to make people associate tourism to well-being. The ordinary citizen should associate tourism with employment. Tourism is a job generator, and mainly clean jobs. And that is another big trend that we see for the future. And finally, we have to make an effort, private sector, public sector, social sector, to truly prioritize tourism, something that happens with political parties when they design their platforms. Tourism is just a side event. It's something that we forgot to mention, so we add a chapter that is called Women, Sports and Tourism. And that has to change. Tourism has to be seen as an essential activity. And as a priority, it has to be supported, among other things, through the budget. The saying goes that love that is not reflected in the budget is not love. So it is essential. Promotion, infrastructure. And finally, in this priority that it deserves, we have to combine efforts, as Gloria said, through public-private participation to define policies and to define a list of obstacles to tourism in a country. What is the obstacle in this country? Perhaps the lack of airports and infrastructure. In that country, maybe the visa system, the immigration requirements. In another country, the lack of promotion, diversification, etc. We will talk about that. President Aznar. First, thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. And second, to be specific, because I see the clock that is counting the seconds and time is moving fast. But as I see that the evolution of tourism in the world has been very favorable in the past years. Except if there is a commercial war of an extraordinary strength that generates an economic crisis in the world, I think the evolution of tourism will be positive in the next few years. And I come from a country that in the past year has only received 82 million tourists. It's a big record in our history. But it means, and I repeat this, that tourism has to be considered an essential part of economic policies in the countries and the objectives and the economic pillars of the countries. The design of the fiscal, labor, energy, infrastructure policies have to have tourism as an essential component if you want to have a country and if you want to be successful in the world of tourism. And from there, provide all the conditions for competition in the tourism sector, because that is where the biggest advantages will be obtained. I think that, as my friend Felipe Calderón said, love and budget is very important, but also love in competition and freedom. That is the love you never forget. That's very important. Marcus, the chief of the cabinet, they have an advantage because they can speak freely. You have to execute, but you're doing a very good job in Argentina. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We are so happy. Our country has suffered so much for being isolated from the world. And there's an important political mandate for us in the area of tourism. It's one of the main priorities as a government, because we also understand that it's a way to bring development, having contact with the world. For many communities and many areas of our country that otherwise were very far from all that, we believe in a more globalized world, more connected, more integrated. We believe in an open world. It's better than a closed world. And in that, tourism, the backpackers and the adventure travelers and then different kinds of tourism generates more connection among the peoples, more possibilities of developing freedom, dialogue, peace. Apart from all they said and we agree with about economy and development, I think it also plays a very important role for a better world, and particularly for us as a government in Argentina for a better Argentina. And we're working on that with all the provinces in Argentina, as I'm sure Gustavo has already mentioned, as well as our president, so that this is integrated as a policy for development and evolution of our community. What you say sounds excellent, extraordinary. And I know that the four of you are convinced of the value of tourism. But unfortunately, many CEOs here know and live this. Sometimes we go to many countries where presidents, prime ministers don't fully understand the value of tourism. They are focused on the protectionism. They implement barriers, new visa proceedings. It is clear that tourism generates jobs, though. So, what recommendations can you make? You perfectly understand the importance of job generation and the value of tourism. What can we say to other presidents, for instance, that take it for granted, don't give the same importance to it? And as you said, they just the secretary or the minister of tourism is the last one, and he has no budget and no love or anything. What would you recommend so that we speak to other countries? They should understand the assets they have, and they should have a clear project. If I take my country as a reference and the Spanish experience, Spain has three important assets: the people, the historical and cultural heritage, and third, the sun and the beaches that are wonderful. The combination of those three factors makes us one of the big powers in the world in terms of tourism. But we started from scratch. The love and for the budget that was necessary for a long time to promote tourism in Spain led to great developments and a lot of competition. But that means having a comprehensive policy. And I insist, when we speak of security, energy, infrastructure, airports, railways, efficiency, when we speak of sustainability, if you want to turn tourism into an essential factor of your economy, you have to consider everything. Sometimes leaders are divided into two kinds, good and bad ones. We are in one half of them. So this is the group of the good ones. There are many bad ones. We belong to the group of the good ones, but we're also willing to convince the bad ones that they can become good. So you can help us a lot. I think you have to try and be among the political priorities of the governments and people as well. For instance, people, they say we want jobs in this community, but they think of a factory, the traditional industrial jobs, when in fact, if a place is exploited from the tourist point of view, it can generate lots of jobs. Creating jobs is very important for the governments. And second, from the private sector, we have to promote information so that decision makers can guide their decisions. What measures can work? For instance, in Mexico, we were very strict and nationalistic, so we always demanded visas from almost all countries to visit Mexico. So if somebody wanted to come to Mexico from Russia, they had to get the visa, and they had to perhaps travel 9 hours to get to Moscow first before coming to Mexico. Or in Brazil, the same. They had to go to Brasilia to obtain the visa. And in fact, one day we proposed different mechanisms until we decided one thing that is very simple. Just as you say that you don't have to be a more fan than the Pope, you don't have to be more American than the Americans. After 9/11, the Americans were so strict to grant their visas. Now they have an important vetting process. But when we started granting visas automatically, or the permits to visit Mexico, to any tourist that had an American visa, and I was very criticized because I was pro-American and etc. But it worked. And then we removed the visa requirements for Colombians. We are like twins, and Venezuelans and Chileans, of course. And tourism, as a result, the tourism from Brazil, Russia, Colombia, in the first year, it multiplied exceeding 100% rates of growth. So you can do things like that, but it's key to convince the governments. I would add to that obviously depending on on the status of the economy in the evolution of tourism, but if we are speaking of countries that are in an early stage, that they still have some resistances, there's no doubt that moving tourism to a political priority, and that requires having somebody in the cabinet that indicates where you should go, because tourism is an industry with many decision-making processes in administration.
So you are in favor of the fact that there should always be a Ministry of Tourism indicating, I mean, at least there should be someone sitting at the cabinet, because the Ministry of Tourism depends on the other ministries for things to happen. In Costa Rica, we gave the status of minister, but at the same time, we maintain an independent agency that ensures a fast decision-making process. So, an independent agency which is empowered. Another thing is to think about incentives. In addition to visa, in addition to stimulating airline aspects, infrastructure, stability, ensuring security and safety, there's also the issue of incentives. At least initially, for us, tax incentives were very important in the sector. So, undoubtedly, those elements, at least in a first stage, tend to be very important. Well, I believe that it's also very important to consider that tourism is not just external tourism into the country, but also tourism is an opportunity to know our own country. So domestic tourism, internal tourism is very important as well, which should also be and is also affordable by the middle class. Argentine people travel a lot, and they really value and appreciate the possibility of traveling. And many times, if people cannot travel abroad, sometimes there may be some reservations or rancor against tourism. So there's a point to solve there that has to do with helping officials, not just the ministers of tourism, but everybody should travel. Officials should travel in the country, should know their country. Not long ago, our president was in the Iguazu Falls, and the governor is here. And the president slept there. And many people said that never before had a president stayed and spent a few days in Iguazu. But these things really allow us to be closer to issues and problems, and sometimes to fix problems. And things are solved just if you are in the site, on the site. That is very important, because many tourist powers really, even 80% of their GDP depends on tourism, and internal tourism is key. We see in the world a protectionist sentiment. I know Argentina for many years had protectionism. I hope that you were here much earlier, because now you are really making a change. However, we see there is a protectionist trend that seems to be affecting certain aspects of free trade and other things too, and the movement of people, the flow of people. And also, due to protectionism, investments are not being made in airports, for instance, in railway systems, in this connectivity, which is also so important for tourism. So what is your opinion in this regard? Do you think that this will be something that will disappear, or are we going to see more protectionist rulers in the future? There are some concerns about it, not just in countries of the region. If you allow me, Gloria, I insist on this because the elements which are characterizing politics, not just in our region, but also globally, related to nationalism, protectionism, populism. This is not an independent variable, but it's a reaction to other things, things that perhaps from society there were some errors in the past. So, there are politicians that also offer an alternative view. And part of the search of solutions to these negative trends, part of the solution has to do with everything that we do from the private sector and also public sector has a good impact on people. So, if there is an industry that has the chances of doing so, is the tourism industry. Costa Rica has got rid of these trends because 50% of the money that tourists bring into the country flows into our economy. We have a good SMEs model, and our hotels on average have 19 rooms. There are local connections. So when these things happen, tourism is an antidote against protectionist measures and populist measures. And unfortunately, make communities become against tourism when actually it should be the other way around and make a virtuous process. Right, and how do we strike a balance between security or safety and openness? There are countries that are imposing more visas, are making the processes more complex. Marcos, how do you make this balance between I need to make sure that people who arrive in Argentina go through a good process, I will include visas, so on and so forth, or I open up the doors in a more free manner? How do you strike a balance here? I think that these two questions are very much related. We cannot generalize. There are countries which are very much open and now have a more protectionist tone in politics, and the other way around, countries like ours, which are now beginning to open up. And security is the same thing. Risk hypotheses are different country by country. So we are trying to look at this problem from a more cooperation perspective, or cooperation, because we think that multilateralism and cooperation is the best path to make the most of opportunities in technology, in databases. So the premise is clear: against terrorism, narco-trafficking, and organized crime. But at the same time, we should not allow those negative things to bring up obstacles for tourism. Sometimes the problem of protectionism and the speech of fear is more related to political aspects rather than economic aspects. A transformational crisis of political leadership. Now that you are talking about technology, I would like to ask President Calderón, and also I would like to ask about the Eurozone as well. But Mr. Calderón, biometrics, we have an issue of capabilities at airports, and we estimate that from 4 billion to 7.8 billion will be the number of passengers by 2023. But when we see airports around the world, there are very few who are actually investing in expansion. Yesterday, the president of the Dubai airport mentioned Egypt, that had been trying to push for a new runway for so long. And on the other side, we see that biometrics, for instance, would make processes faster, managing more volumes. Why do you think we have not implemented the same thing? Face recognitions, for instance, in order to enter a country? Well, perhaps this has to do with not knowing the advantages of technology. I have a passport, I have a diplomatic passport. So whenever I go to the US, I go through the global entry and I see the experience because face recognition is definite. And this should be replicated worldwide. There's no way of working or managing the mobility in the future without technology. There are 4 billion travelers a year. And so, well, how many more there may be? We should take the technology leap towards technology. Paradoxically, you can go through faster and at the same time more secure. Because if we are able to identify people with their fingerprint, as José María said, it will be also easier to identify who the bad guys are. And one more point, Gloria. We should also provide evidence, and the hardest evidence is money. So, based on the impacts that protectionism may bring about, without making prejudice, if possible, the nationalist and anti-Mexican speech of Mr. Trump's discourse currently has an impact, regardless of the fact that there has not been any new measure in terms of visa. But the impact in the US is also strong because Mexican tourists went down from 19 million to 17 million approximately. So Mexicans spend $15 billion a year. And in the US, with a lower per capita index, we spend $18 billion a year. So Americans lost jobs because of nationalism. And if we are able to make changes there, things will be better. President Aznar, the euro, this has been a great driver for the implementation of the euro, the currency itself, a great initiative. However, we have the Schengen problems and the Brexit as well. So going back to these trends that we are seeing, what will the impact be in that regard? I know it's a little bit complex, but now you are not part of the government, so you can give your opinion freely. Even though I was in the government, I would speak my mind. I think that Brexit is a huge mistake, with all respect. Not even the Brexit will serve to make a new runway in Heathrow. And it may weaken the European Union or it may cause other effects, but Brexit is a barrier to Europe and is a mistake for the UK in particular. The world of today is not the same world as that after World War II. The world has changed. So making those type of decisions, in my opinion, is a mistake. The euro instead, well, has shown its strengths, and it was the most important thing that Europe did and has done since its creation. 18 countries sharing the same currency is a huge landmark. So the European Union is the story of success, and such success should be maintained. And in the past, Europeans would fight against each other. We were experts in having wars and bringing wars into other places. Today, we discuss about love, budgets, European Union things, but we discuss at least. And the euro zone has become a strong economic area, and I believe in the virtues of euro for tourism as well, because it brings about little indebtedness, no deficit, stability, and healthy domestic economies. And that will help a lot against protectionism. And another example, in 1973, Spain was not part of the European community, and Spain brokered a trade deal with the community. And Spain had a trade surplus with all European countries but one, Portugal. When Spain joined the European Union in 1986, Spain had started having deficit with all countries but one, which was Portugal. So the Spain of 1986 was better compared to that of the 70s? Yes, of course. Spain in 1986 was prosperous. When Spain joined the euro in 1999, prosperity boomed. Was that Spain better? Yes, of course. If we had stayed with the protectionist Spain of trying to look for bilateral surpluses at the expense of not understanding the economy, we would have made a gross mistake. Great. And in Europe, as we know, there is an easy flow of people towards the region, particularly Asia. Asia is growing fast. And we know that the middle class in China, they are really traveling a lot. What happens in Latin America? Latin America is very complex to fly, as you know very well, to travel. If someone comes from Asia to this part of the world, it would be also great to have a multiple destination from here to Costa Rica, Colombia, Mexico. And if we go to Europe, we would like to enter through Spain. We are entering through France many times, but we also have the Spanish chance. So, how can we include this priority on our agreements? Because these are bilateral agreements. So, if the Ministry of Tourism is promoting a greater number of tourists, how can I make the most of those tourists so that they can move around easily? Well, Costa Rica has managed to position itself in a very successful manner with a value proposition that was very good more than 30 years ago. But we are a very small destination. Fortunately, tourists choose to stay in our country, but they are also changing their decisions. So we are trying to see how we can expand our offer into our neighboring countries. And we've been able to do so despite the fact that we've also had some problems with our neighbors in the north, which is not Mexico, by the way, right? We are not the neighbor that you are having trouble with. No, the adjacent neighboring country, not the other one. So, Gloria, as I said, the private sector has been very important. Many companies have investments, Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua, and this sector has been key in order to implement policies beyond the differences that the governments may have. So, from the perspective of passenger flows through the sea or in the customs and borders, there the private sector has a strong influence. And right now, the tourism packages are being offered, for instance, Costa Rica, Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua. Well, this is a very important topic because even countries that promote tourism in parallel compete a lot one against the other without understanding that there's no sense competing one over the other. With Chile, for instance, Chinese tourism should be the same for Argentina as well as for Chile. So tourists will want to maximize the trip to South America. So we worked hard in order to break down cultural barriers with our neighboring countries. Then, of course, we have to dig deep into how we can work among tourist agencies and open up and expand so that this is a win-win situation for everybody and offer the region that can offer a richer product, which is also helpful in the political manner. There is also this show of cooperation. Yes, and going back to populism and protectionism, we know that the system is not so favorable for that. Well, Yes, Mr. Calderon. Well, a success story has to do with regional visa systems. The ASEAN in Asia, for instance, we should think of a Latin American visa, common visa system. Then we should also break down with the barriers in terms of cultural aspects. There are many tourists. One every 10 tourists in the world is Chinese. And sometimes there are no policies to attract Chinese tourists. Well, we should work on that. We should not also promote our sun and beaches, our shows, and music and magic towns. We should offer full packages. So if one single country can offer those, imagine how well we would be if we join forces. Well, in this case, we have the Chief of Cabinet here, and I really wish you success. I think that you are going through a very special time here. There is a wish for us so that Argentina has success. There is a positive view from Argentina. There are good prospects for the future. I hope that you do well. We really want to see a triumphant Argentina. We wish you the best. Thank you very much.
Definitivamente. Se nos acaba.
Definitely. We are running out of time. Unfortunately, yesterday President Macri gave a keynote speech, as the minister did. And would you like to add anything? Because we really feel Argentina is on the right track. Well, yes, I agree with former President Aznar. We really want Argentina to succeed in the region. We need to support the government in this task of putting tourism at the centerpiece. Tourism cannot be at the sidelines. Now you are holding the G20 in the future. So in Mexico, when we were the venue of the G20, one of our main priorities was to promote tourism along with the G20. That calls a lot of attention and is very fruitful. President Calderon, you were the only one who managed to include tourism as part of the G20 agenda with migration participation. So we really want Argentina to do the same thing. Was it in 2012, right? Yes, it was in 2012. So Argentina should heed that. It would be so good. Laura, would you like to say anything? Thank you very much to Argentina, the warm welcome they gave us. How many countries would really like to be Argentina? Because this country has so many beautiful things to offer, and you shouldn't even do any type of advertising. So half of the path is already traveled. You really have lots of things to show to the world. The only thing you need to say is, well, you need to shout out that you really want everybody to visit you. So in the future, probably you will have to cope with so many tourists. I have a friend who says that the best Mexican food is the Argentine food. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great honor to have you here, a great panel.